Well, good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's Wednesday night, and it's my pleasure to welcome David Cranmer Underdown back to the show for a little duo with myself. I've really enjoyed the trios we've been doing lately, but I think I have missed the idea of just the two of us talking some. And, in preparation for tonight, I decided to just say, well, you know what? David is usually interested in some very fascinating things, and I haven't been able to keep up with his Twitter feed lately. So let's just see what's on David's agenda tonight. I'm not going to try to drive it. I just want to see where David's at because it's always interesting to me. So, David, how are you, and what's been on your mind?
Well, I'm doing very well. As I said before, I had a really interesting day and a nice Sunday. I've had a couple of good experiences at the Cranbrook School, which I post about quite a bit. And it's where my nephew is in the Brookside School right now. And so I was invited to go on the walking tour of the campus, which is absolutely fascinating because it features famous architects and characters and throughout history that related to Detroit. Um, so those were the things that I got to do today, which have been really interesting. And then um, the other things that I thought would be interesting things to discuss with you was one was your comment on the Alan Dulles and the Roy Cohn relationship, which is always interesting to me, and then also maybe touch on the fact that there was the Newsweek article that I think came out Monday talking about how the CIA is now admitting that Oswald had a CIA relationship, which they'd previously denied, and then also a a memo that was from 1971 uh, written to Henry Kissinger and I should have written his name down. His last name was Elliott. He was part of the Elliott, the old Boston Brahmin Elliott family that wrote that Hitler went to Madrid, Spain, and lived until 1971 in Spain. And then he's buried in an unmarked grave in the whatever the cathedral is across from their capital in Madrid. I can't remember the name of it. It wasn't. It wasn't Alameda, but it was something like that. So
You mean
whatever.
he was in a Catholic cathedral?
Hmm.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Well, they
I
said
mean,
Franco was the one that shielded him. So it was the Franco, Francus Spain was the one that took him in, which again is intriguing because they were not, you know, allies during the war. If my history is correct on that, they were I don't
well,
yeah.
Franco was simply uh, uh, playing it safe by declaring neutrality.
Hmm.
But he was a deep ally of Hitler and Mussolini, and Mussolini and Franco worked together for a long time, controlling the Mediterranean, and it's not Franco is just as bad a dude in many ways as a Hitler or a Mussolini. So, and of course, about the Spanish Civil War and the atrocities and how they worked together with the German Air Force bombing the Republicans and all. So, yeah, that's very, a very intriguing. But you see these reports from time to time. The one that you see on YouTube is Hitler's maids or cook, I guess, in Argentina is
Hmm.
interviewed, and she talks about, oh yes, Herr Hitler, he did this and that, and of course there is that great Nazi presence in Argentina and also Paraguay, Brazil, and Chile in some parts. That was the result of the paperclip program and the rat lines. Not the paper clips, but the rat lines are related, but South American version where, uh, as best I understand it, it was the Pope assisting the SS and bad guys from the German and other allied Nazi, murderers to get to safe havens, and generally those were in South America. And people do say that Hitler escaped. And well, of course, the other aspect of it is, have we ever really learned what the Russians know about the death of Hitler? Because I think it was clear at the beginning that Stalin believed that Hitler had survived.
Hmm.
So this is interesting. And if it's a genuine, was it a CIA document? Who was it? You said it was from somebody named Elliot. So
It was from Elliot. I don't have all the specific details like that.
it's okay.
What it was, I think it could have been a State Department cable, but I'm not sure. Kissinger was the Secretary of State, I believe, at that point.
Hmm. And Kissinger was the sender of the memo. Is that right?
Yeah,
What?
he wrote it, and I guess the way I understood it was almost like a memo to myself to, that this should never be spoken of or whatever, but I'm going to write it down. So again, it is it's it's ambiguous, to say the least, but it is interesting to me that we talked about before with the Camp King situation with Kissinger, being being a G2 Army intelligence person at Camp King in Germany, and being the translator for Alan Dulles during that period, where I do think Dulles was, obviously a very key figure in negotiating the fallout of these rat lines and things like that. I know. I was just reading that, was it Karl Wolf who was the person that was meeting him in Bern to do these different passports. And
The general.
yeah.
Yeah, General Wolf. Yeah.
Hmm.
And he was working with Dulles to evade uh, Roosevelt's order that there be the only surrender must be an unconditional surrender.
Hmm.
Like U.S. Grant at Donaldson. The
Yeah.
only terms which I can accept are unconditional surrender, and that was Roosevelt's order. But Dulles, he's not really working for Roosevelt. He's working for his Sullivan Cromwell clients, as far as I know, and
Hmm.
that's who he's responding to, is their needs, and they need to save these Nazis. They need to save the knowledge. They need to save the factories themselves. Um, all of that stuff. They have big investments. So, I
Yeah.
mean, this is General Motors money. This is Ford and all the Wall Street investment that we know about through
Yeah.
Harriman and
And
all of
United
that.
too, which is such a key corporation in the history of all of those South American, Condor and the overthrows in the Central and South America, was United Fruit, which was a Dulles, Sullivan and Cromwell client.
Well, you also mentioned something that I posted not too long ago on Twitter, which is kind of the third or fourth time that I've tossed this idea out there to see if it flies. But what I'm thinking is, now that we know that Alan Dulles and Sullivan and Cromwell and John Foster Dulles as well, I believe, knew Roy Cohn, and the common interest that goes back to Harlan Fiske Stone between the intelligence services, Donovan and Dulles, and you know anyway, that whole idea that Dulles is on the CIA side, and then you have your Army McCarthy people that are on the radical right wacko side, the World Anti-Communist League side, and they're always against each other. But what and this was suggested to me by an article by Tony Chaikin in Executive Employee executive intelligence review at larouchepub.com, which is just such a great resource. But after reading that article and realizing that, yeah, Dulles knew this guy, and how was it that, you know, both sides just kept doing business. Neither one of them ever wins or shuts down the other side. And so I've been thinking that Roy Cohn was really ultimately a plant in the conservative side's law firm or lawyering, put in a position that, as you know, representing McCarthy, representing that right-wing side of American politics, at the same time as he is basically flaunting his homosexuality and allowing all of these vicious rumors, which basically turn out to be true, to exist. Was this a overall plot by Alan Dulles to infect the minds of America to the idea that don't even go there, don't even look at your basic conservative ideas, because they're all, you know, filthy, you know, and in the 1950s terms, anything homosexual was by definition disgusting. Not that way now, but it certainly was then. So I guess that was the point, that I was trying to see if it had any traction. I'd be interested to see whether you think that makes any sense, that ultimately Roy Cohn was able to disaffect America from its conservative roots by just being there and allowing all of these stories, which have unfortunately basis behind them, to infect the American mind.
Well, he is a very interesting character for me for many reasons, and um, you know, his New York City background. He's Columbia. He was famous for riding in a limousine to Horace Mann High School with uh, Generalissimo Pope Jr., whose father was the big cement tycoon that was friends with Mussolini, that had the Il Progresso Italian newspaper that was supposedly so influential. And he was also friends with Cy Newhouse, who was they were the three best friends at Horace Mann. And Cy Newhouse is the person that, you know, takes over Condé Nast. So it becomes a very influential publisher and fashion magazines. And related to my experiences at Cranbrook, he actually ends up acquiring some of the Booth and Scripps media, was acquired by Cy Newhouse. But Cohn is interesting because his there's a lot of like, as you said, I mean, he was from very wealthy Jewish background in New York, but his best friend was somebody that was Gene Pope, who was very close with you know, all of the politicians of New York City, including Francis Spellman, the Pope himself, um, and then he gets in with Louis Rosenthal, who has the Shenley Liquors, and the three of them are all very tight with Spellman. So I'm interested to hear what your take is with the Kennedy family, because I know, you know, with JFK being obviously the first Catholic president and coming into so much power, but I think if I remember correctly, Spellman was not fully supportive of Kennedy, and that there was a bit of a rivalry there. And then, of course, with Alan Dulles, with his son Avery Dulles being, I think in the same, was he at St. Patrick's in New York also? I don't know all that history, but I know his son had a very powerful role in the Catholic Church as well. And then I always think of Fletcher Prouty talking about how the Dulles brothers, when they weren't the Secretary of State or the head of the CIA, they were flying all over the world for the Baptist conventions for the Calvinists, and they were very involved in the that specific religion. So again, mixing in sort of these political and intelligence, but also the religious aspects, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and the homosexuality aspect of it is also very. I mean, it's one of those things that at the time it was just nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody even wanted to think about it. It was just one of those things that, ooh, you just go, ooh, I don't want to know about it. I don't want to think about it. And the idea of a Roy Cohn, and just that he is, you see pictures of him, and that, what's his, David Shine, I think his name is, the boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just get turned off to whatever the guy is going to say, whatever reason he might have had, on behalf of his clients. American people never heard it, and that did discredit the people he was representing. And is that something that he was doing, say, for Spellman, who was notoriously, I guess gay is the word? One might easily go to the altar boys idea with him. It's not something I'm going to say explicitly on, but where I'm going with that. And that lines up with the Roy Cohn world as well.
Mm-hmm.
Although, that part of it was secret. Cohn was the dark, the little bit hint of darkness that the people can see in order to be, kind of hypnotized with the effect of it. But yeah, why would not Spellman benefit from the same thing? And as far as Kennedy, I don't think that Kennedy was infected by that Spellman, I don't know, coterie, but Spellman was an agent of Pacelli, the Pope Pius XII, and then Montini after that, Paul VI. These guys are very close associated with Allen Dulles and the CIA, especially Montini, the Paul VI guy, and that, all of it just really does tie together very neatly when you talk about the rat lines and back to Argentina. And was Hitler really killed in the bunker? I don't think so. And I also think that Martin Bormann escaped,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't buy the story on, finding his dental records, so many decades afterwards in the 60s. Oh, here he is. We can tell by his teeth. Yeah, sure. So I think there's a lot of truth to this, but I'm still, because there have been so many stories and probably planting false leads to confuse us or to discredit us and to you know uh, um, gaslight us,
Yeah.
that I'm not going to jump on it right away. Yeah, I do think that Cohn is one of the darkest figures in American history.
Yeah.
And we need to put that out there on the table and let people, really examine it. And where did he come from? The religious stuff is, yeah, I mean, take Kennedy at his word, that he was, yeah, he was a Catholic, but he wasn't voted to be the Pope.
Right.
He was voted to be the president of this democratic republic. And he did the best, as far as I can tell, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, which is the ultimate mission of all of us. So I don't think that Spellman had the power over Kennedy. If he did, then Kennedy wouldn't have been free to try to liberate Africa and try to support independence movements around the world, and to try not to have to go over there with American troops to Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia the way that they needed to do. They obviously needed to do that badly enough to assassinate him.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is important to remember was that there was a rivalry between RFK and Roy Cohn. They were competing for the position as McCarthy's assistant, and then so that's something again, obviously with RFK being assassinated in '68, is interesting. And then I also think too of the Father Coughlin, which is in Royal Oak, Michigan, which is something that is always so interesting to me, that he was had this huge audience, and he was speaking a pacifist message originally, and then these same characters were brought in: Joe Kennedy, Spellman, Frank Murphy, who was the mayor of Detroit and became a Supreme Court justice, and Pacelli. They went in and had him, uh, get off the radio, and so that's always interesting to me too, because that ties right into those rumors about Joe Kennedy, doing the rum running over Hiram Walker's turf in Prohibition, and having the hits put out on him by the Purple Gang in Detroit, and Frank Costello, who was the godfather of Gene Pope, was the one that called it off, and all this stuff. So that stuff's always interesting to me too, because of the with them, you talked about Ford and General Motors and their role, because then, JFK then brings in Robert McNamara to be his Secretary of Defense. And he, of course, was had that Ford Motor pedigree and came with the Whiz Kids. So those things are all things that I think about when I try to analyze these things. And then also remember that Ford Motor and General Motors were international corporations, and that in the 30s they had signed these deals with General Motors, acquired Opel, which was the largest automaker in Europe, and then Ford actually signed a deal with Konrad Adenauer, who later comes back with the Reinhard Gehlen and the BND relationship. And then he was also Adenauer was also the man that met with Nethum Goldman, who was the he helped negotiate the war reparations for World War II for Israel, and his son Guido Goldman becomes a protege of Henry Kissinger at Harvard University, and then he created the German Marshall Fund, which is something that is still relevant to this very moment. So those connections I think about too, with these, especially with the intelligence agency angles, and then with the Ford Foundation also, and how that came to be, as far as the the sort of the taking over of the Rand Corporation from Douglas Aviation, and then making it taking it from a Douglas program, and then having it become basically an independent California-based corporation in Santa Monica. So that's something that that I think about also, is when thinking about Roy Cohn, because again, as I've said before, his uncle owned Lionel Trains, and of course, everybody thinks of the trains, but they also had patents with the Navy for underwater explosives, and he was a big Navy war contractor, the Lionel business. And that was something that Roy Cohn took over. He bought it from his uncle, and he was also brought in, is it Joe Bonanno, who was the president of it? The Florida Mafia guys was his partner in it. And then, of course, it was owned by my homeroom classmate's dad in Michigan later, and their name is a kind of a variation of Kuhn. So I don't know. It's a so I always wonder about those things with those connections. I mean, it's but as far as with Roy Cohn and with the the homosexuality, I have to say that I feel like what he did with the Lavender Scare, where he was just crushing and ruining people's careers as a hypocrite, is honestly one of the worst tactics. I don't know. I just think it's really I mean, I have to say I have great empathy because I with different family members and things like that, that I do feel like it is a tough that gay people have a tough situation in many cases, and I don't know. I just think it's hard when you have a character like a Roy Cohn who's literally investigating government workers and getting them fired, when he himself is you think he would be promoting the interests of gay people, but he didn't.
I think he was groomed to be a bad guy from an early age,
Yeah.
and that's another part of just the tragedy of it. People don't come out of the womb thinking I want to be a bad guy. You know, I don't think God makes us bad, but the the people around us will sometimes take a child and determine that what we need here is somebody that'll do the dirty work for us. So we're going to treat them very badly as children and force them to think in a way that they will do evil for us. And that type of grooming has been going on for a long, 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 long time. Is the grim fairy tales are based on that type of story, and they go way back in history. Taking a child and giving it a horrible life just to benefit your own interests. It's kind of an imperial thing to do. The thing that people just responding to an irresistible power that forces you to do things, or being the irresistible power and becoming addicted to it so that you can just play with people like pieces of Lego bricks. It's amazing that that humanity has gotten as far as we have, and that's why I always come back to the Constitution and say we've got to just preserve this thing, because even though right now it doesn't look like it's helping us a lot because the bad guys have got control of our institutions, it's there. It's a foundation. It's the basic building blocks of a great country. It's still there. And I just hope people don't give up on it. I have a fun little speculation for you.
Okay.
I'm going to show you this flag and see what you think of it. Hang on, if I can do this.
The Cranbrook walking tour is a feast for symbol and analysis there. I feel like they really were into the different motifs. It's very fascinating. So I like this kind of project.
All right. Well, okay. This is a flag that I thought was very interesting in that it has a purple star on it.
Hmm.
Other than that, it looks like a standard, St. George's cross in the upper left, indicating England,
Yeah.
and a big orange field. And of course, it says down at the bottom, this is the flag of the Orange Order. Now, here's what I thought of when I saw that purple star. I thought, wait a minute. All these Williamites, the William and Mary, this Dutch people that came and united with the commercial interest, the oligarchical control families of England during uh, you know as they had the Glorious Revolution, and then under Queen Anne, whom they basically used for a figurehead while they were doing more manipulation. Then you have, all of the Dutch interest in New York, in Canada, in Hudson, and then getting over to Detroit. And I was thinking, well, you have all of this, all these connections between Dutch, old Dutch power, old Dutch money, and Detroit, and then you have there a gang which chooses the name the Purple Gang. And I
Hmm.
thought, maybe this Orange Order, which is the Masonic order that supported the Protestant side in the Northern Ireland wars, um, maybe that Protestant order is exerting itself in Michigan and Detroit and around our Great Lakes, and had a kind of a dark side, the low, the as below, as above, as below part, may have indeed been symbolized by the color purple. So anyway, I thought that was kind of just maybe too much of a stretch, but what do you think?
I love this kind of analysis because whenever I think of the purple, I think of the Tyrian purple. So you can go back to your Hercules with his dog finding the shell on the beach and finding the Tyrian purple dye. And then you have the Royal Dutch Shell Company, which was a dyeing company, and with purple being the most valuable dye. And then you have the IG Farben making synthetic dyes. So that's another interesting sort of the dyers guilds. And it's with Detroit, yeah. And um, I do think it is. I mean, even just before I came over here, I was talking to my dad about the tour, and he's always very interested because his friend was Peter Booth, so his grandparents were the founders of Cranbrook, and Peter's mother was a Newcomb, and Newcomb was a department store in Detroit before Hudson's, which I definitely think is related to the Hudson, Henry Hudson and Hudson Bay and all, all the above. Um, but the Newcomb was the same backstory as Hudson's. They started off in the Detroit Opera House. That was where their first retail location was in 1860. And this is, of course, in Campus Martius. So, now you can go to your, fields of Mars. So if you want to talk about Elon Musk or our friend Werner von Braun and his, Mars book with Elon being the star of the book and all that stuff, the Mars societies, that was Opel. That was a General Motors company where that original rocket club started that Werner von Braun was in, that was to go to Mars or whatever was sort of the mission of it. But the family that started or owned the Opera House in Detroit is the Niederlander family, which is they're a very well known in the theater world with the Niederlander Theater Company. And
Just so people understand, Nederlander is the German word for a Dutch person, Netherlands.
and just on the personal story for that, there is a Eric Niederlander was a Cranbrook alumni, and he was running the Niederlander Theater Company in New York. And when my sister first moved there, um, his cousin got her an interview with Eric, and she was so fresh out of college and wanted to obviously impress and get the job and everything. So she called him, and he never called her back, and she was so hurt, and she felt like she'd screwed up and done something wrong. And it turned out that was right when Jerry Seinfeld had swooped in and stole his wife, like literally a month into the marriage. So there are all these backstories with things like that as well that I think about, because with Seinfeld, you now get into your Steve Bannon trading the royalties of Seinfeld with our friend Ted Turner when he acquired I think it was Universal, I think was the company that owned that. But yeah, that and then the Hudson story is also fascinating in Detroit because Hudson was a large department store, and like you were telling me before the show about your memories of going to Washington, D.C. and sort of the magical.
Woody's, the Woodward and Lothrop store.
So Detroit had three kind of main stores. There was Kearns, Crowley's, and Hudson's. And Hudson's, I think, was known for being kind of like Macy's. They really got, like hired the specialists to do the decorations and, really promoted the idea of holiday shopping. But that family was not the Niederlander family. The Niederlander family, they owned the opera house. The J.L. Hudson was the proprietor of the Hudson department stores, but he is also really interesting because his niece marries Edsel Ford, and then his other niece marries a guy named um, Jackson. I'm trying to think what his first name was, but he was the treasurer of the Hudson Auto Company. So you've got Edsel married to one Hudson daughter. J.L. Hudson stakes the Hudson Auto Company with this Jackson, running it with Roy Chapin, who then later is the one that in 1933 he becomes Secretary of Commerce under under FDR. And he's the one that negotiates with Henry Ford and Edsel Ford to do the bank holiday in the state of Michigan, to collapse the Guardian Union Bank, which is the story that I've talked about quite a bit, which it was the original banking collapse that sparks the national bank holidays. And now you've got FDR giving his famous fireside chats to calm the American public after the bank holiday. And that's and that with the Detroit part, as far as the Hudson and the flag that you showed, the orange, what was it? The Orange
Order. Yeah,
the
it's a big Masonic order of that marches through Derry, or as they call it, Londonderry.
Londonderry.
Yeah,
Because part of the intrigue of the Hudson Auto Company is that during right before World War II, the Fisher body family, which was they made the auto bodies and they were acquired by General Motors, but the Fisher brothers wanted to buy Hudson Automobile Company, and the person that was supposedly the number one shareholder of Hudson was Queen Wilhelmina, the Dutch queen. And that is, of course, super fascinating because her daughter Juliana is the one that marries our Dark Prince, Prince Bernard, that we talk about a lot, that creates the World Wildlife Fund. And he's the IG Farben accountant in Paris when David Rockefeller is in Paris for representing the Standard Oil interests. And then you have the tetraethylene ethyl company selling their no-knock fuel to the Luftwaffe, which is a joint venture between Standard Oil of New Jersey and the General Motors Corporation. So there's a lot of, when you show a flag like that, I really think, yeah, there's a lot of crossover there between, the Purple Gang angle, which was very much like known like a Chicago outfit, or, they were doing they had like they were rum runners. They had, they had like what was called the Kosher Navy, where they were, running the booze over the, Detroit River and whatnot. But, I think that's all a throw because, again, Royal Dutch Shell was started by the Samuel family, and the Samuel family is one of those Moncada, Spanish, Sephardic Jewish banking families that, again, is going to go back to the Templars, because we know that all of the any old banking family is going to be a Knights Templar, whether you're Jewish or Catholic or Protestant now. your legacy is going to be Knights Templar, because they were the ones that were created encryption and checking, and they had the security along the roads, and that was just kind of goes with the trade companies, goes hand in hand.
You know, when you say that, I smile and I say, "Wow, we've gotten to the point where we can just say something as comprehensive as that." That you know, if you are in one of those families that has a deep history in finance, uh, it goes back to the Knights Templar, and that does just everything reinforces the idea of all the secret societies basically being creatures of the financial power. And I think of how I was just recent. You probably read Eustace Mullins, for instance, when he says that John Calvin, okay, the name Calvin was really not Calvin. That's the way the Swiss said it, but it was really Cowan, Cauin, which, if you really think about it, is actually the same thing as Cohen.
Mm.
And then you say, wait a minute, you're saying that Calvin was really a Jewish agent creating this extremely extremely manipulable form of Christianity that happens to be very convenient to the financial people. Okay, well, let me think about that, because that just blows away about 500 years of religious doctrine. And then you look back into Spain and Portugal, and where does our friend Ignatius come from? And he's a soldier, right? And he gets wounded, and he has a revelation. But the doctrines that the Jesuits preach are starting to look an awful lot like the doctrines that the ancient societies would have used to control the population. And I just wonder if it all doesn't, if he doesn't, he also comes from a Templar money background and was made useful to the Pope in order to, preserve the Pope's power against, you know, the people of Provence, the Cathars and all of that. That was, that unfortunately brutal crusade that people don't really know much about that either. But the idea of the militant societies being the dark arm of the empire and supporting, when the financial people say, hey, we got to deal with this or that or whatever by any means necessary. Well, they supply the means. And like Lyndon Johnson said, you mean we're running a goddamn Murder Incorporated here? Well, yeah, you are, and you always have been. That's the way financial power works.
But he should have known. I was actually reading the George Bush unauthorized biography, and it talked about the Ledkey brothers. And when they were at the University of Texas Law School, they rented the servants' home where they lived, and that was where John Connolly lived in LBJ's house. So again, so you've got the brothers that join up with the Bushes in Zapata oil and later Pennzoil and all these things, living in LBJ's house with his wife Lady Bird, with her arsenal family business, with the whole what was the Texas Armory or whatever her family owned. And then but on the same idea with the same with like the Templars or whatnot, like I do think that they look at they always want to control like the energy source of the day and the transportation and logistic networks. And that was something that I was just looking at before also, was that Edwin Mandell House's father, who was a mayor of Houston, he was also the one that founded the Houston Natural Gas Company. And it's not the same. It's not the same Houston Natural Gas that becomes Enron, but something to remember is that in London, the two men that brought piped gas into the city of London to provide lights was Moses Montefiore and his brother-in-law Nathan Mayer Rothschild, and they're the ones that brought the original gas business. So again, tying into this Royal Dutch Shell, British Petroleum, they just take what, whether it's the coal era or the wood burning era. I think they either think of it themselves, or they just use the John D. Rockefeller tactics of just destroying their rivals and consolidating the whatever the new energy source is. And so it's so I look at that stuff, and it does seem hard to believe, like with the Ford Motor Company. I've talked a lot about the Woodland House, which was John Bugis, who was brought in by Edsel Ford to do security for his family. He had an FBI background. When he doesn't become the president of Ford Motor Company, he joins Max Fisher at the Marathon Oil, and again, it's like it's one of those stories. Like, how does a guy that was from Pittsburgh, was a football player at Ohio State, and all this stuff, how does he acquire the Ohio Oil Company that John D. Rockefeller himself built as his oil empire? I mean, think of all the There Will Be Blood movies and all the wars and everything. Like, how does a guy just kind of roll in the 70s and acquire John D. Rockefeller's Marathon Oil Company? It's doesn't add up. I don't know that, all these backstories are crazy to me. Like, I was watching the Michigan play Purdue in the Big Ten championship game with my family last weekend, and their stadium is the Lucas Oil Stadium, and Lucas Oil is the same thing. It's a guy from Southern Indiana that had one gas station, one filling station in Southern Indiana, and like 10 years later, he's a billionaire, and he's got the naming rights to the Indianapolis Colts' football stadium. I mean, it's like, maybe, I don't know. It seems like you're probably, to me, it's much more likely the whole like Knights Templar family background is probably more likely, or maybe you are somebody that, as Professor Hamamoto has talked about, you're a real talent that is cherry picked from, and cultivated to be in those roles.
Yeah, cherry picked and cultivated. I know that story. And we're running out of time. I wanted to get your opinion, if you have one, on this big picture thing that's kind of bothered me. I tend to go with Harley Schlanger on the question of, where's the driving force of our evil world today? And yeah, it's probably the City of London, the House of Lords, the oligarchical families, the old power money that dates back, through there to the Dutch, to the Venetians, to the Babylon. I mean, to the, uh, all the great empires, the collection of incredible wealth, so much money now probably squirreled away in Switzerland or Antarctica or whatever, that there's no way that we would ever compete with it financially. And so they have this incredible power that they use against us. Well, most people, especially a lot of people that I've noticed writing that happen to be Canadian, but a lot of people, Americans too, that are analyzing where's the great evil. They don't see it in London. They think it's in Wall Street. They think, that and Lisa Pease, the great, fantastic author of the of A Lie Too Big to Fail, about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. But she says, that Alan Dulles was running his own shop. He was answerable to nobody. Whereas I think he had to have been answerable through his law firm's clients that ultimately go to the financial powers that still are in the city of London. So I tend to think, there's some there's got to be an answer as to whether, after World War II, did the American establishment decide that they were so powerful now with all the armies and, winning two ocean wars and everything? We're the unbeatable power. We don't need to do what the City of London says anymore. We're going to provide our own financing. We're going to run our own thing, and we're going to take over, the colonial resources that the Europeans used to exploit, and we're going to be the big boss now. On the other hand, what I think is really happening now is if Dulles and the powers of Wall Street thought that they could do that, they were wrong, because the old power, the old money, the London power has figured out how to defeat them, and that this war against that that the American Rockefellers types thought that they were the richest and the most powerful, but in fact, it's the old money in Europe that still is more powerful than them. And that, you know, that is goes a long way to my theory about China, in that the American empire was going to the west, to the west, to the west. They finally got to China. They got Shanghai. They started, making a whole lot of money over there with Chiang Kai-shek, and the Americans were like taking over. And Britain finally said, you know what? We're going to run our own shop in China. Let's get Mao on our side, and we're going to go down there and we're going to take over all the great resources of China, and we're going to push the Americans out, and thereby deprive the Americans of all that loot that they were going to grab. And so we've been pushed back in China to Taiwan, and but the British have been doing business with Red China ever since 1949. So that question, which I guess took me 5 minutes to put the question, is probably way too big for a minute or two answer.
Yeah.
But what do you think? Is it Britain still that we need to be looking to kind of explain itself and say, let's stop being so aggressive and mean to the rest of the world? Or has Britain really lost its power, and it really is Wall Street that we need to talk to, and not the City of London? What do you think?
Well, I think that I definitely think that the Warburgs and the previously listed sort of Mokata banking families, which includes the um, Rothschilds and Goldsmiths, the Sassoons, like all these names that people throw around. One of the events. So what I think on this subject, when you talk about like new empire versus old and these struggles, I think one of the oldest tricks is to blame the atrocities on your atrocities on the people that you conquered, or somebody, to always try to shift the blame of. And that's something always to consider, that I don't know. I mean, because again, like, I don't know if there ever are like good characters when you're talking about like colonization, and that you just have to pick the people that are um, built, to do that kind of assignment. But one of the things that I really think comes up is the and especially like currently, like right now in the United States, is that I've sensed that there's the idea of doing it like a second civil war, and having a with the whole BLM, with those that movement with Donald Trump, and promoting him sort of as a nationalist type leader. That's what I feel. That's what I've sort of sensed is what they're going for, and a lot of the blame on that is to go to try to kind of bring up the old South idea. And you talk about, you read about it a lot, and go to the founding fathers and the Virginia Company and all this kind of original how that all started. But one of the things that I think about a lot is this 1833, the abolishment of slavery in England, because the person that was really into that was this Samuel Wilberforce, was a big promoter of getting rid of slavery. And he was also the same person that was involved in the theory of evolution debates with Darwin and with Thomas Henry Huxley, the Darwin's bulldog. And then Richard Owen was the one with Wilberforce. And that, I think, is a really interesting thing, because it sort of ties into what we're talking about now as far as the pandemic and how medicine and treatment of illness should be applied. I think is very directly tied to this this Darwin question. But I think also colonization in general is tied to the Darwin question. But the groups that really come out as the winner from that 1833 slavery abolishment was Moses Montefiore and Nathan Mayer Rothschild. They're the ones that floated the loan to the nation of England to reimburse the slave owners. And it was 40% of the GDP of England in 1837 when they issued it. And they paid it back over something like 170 years. It was called like the Gilt Portfolio was the name of it. But that was paid to, that's the same Nathan Mayer Rothschild and Moses Montefiore, that where we come to now, and we're talking about like a Jacob Rothschild or Nathan Rothschild and their dealings with like Glencore and the Belt and Road, and they're doing these international oil deals, and the whole Genie Energy and all these things. It goes back to Jacob Rothschild. And so if I'm going to point fingers, like I think that's somebody to look at. But I also think the Warburgs are really important, because they were, you had Paul Warburg, who was the Kuhn and Loeb director for the Federal Reserve Act, and then you had his brother Max Warburg, who's working at the Reichsbank and Deutsche Bank, and he's the one that's working with Helmar Schlecht. And his son, is Eric Warburg, that starts Warburg Pincus. And Warburg Pincus is that's where you have Tony Blinken, our current Secretary of State's dad, was an initial director of that. It was the original company that financed Kissinger and Associates. And then it also has our friend Timothy Geithner, whose dad was the Ford Foundation director that was running their microcredit program, which famously he taught Ann Dunham, the mother of Obama, how to do the microloans in Indonesia for the Ford Foundation. So those are the groups that I think are really important. I mean, I think on more of the military and the enforcement, I do think that the kind of the Blackwater group is really important. I think it's insane that Leon Black's Apollo ends up buying Academy, which is the old Blackwater, because his dad, was a United Fruit Company director that famously flies out of the Pan Am building and dies. And, United Fruit Company's taken over by by Max Fisher and by the Milstein family. But Eric Prince then gets into this Frontier Services Group, which is a South African-based, enforcement, and they're doing Belt and Road. They're doing the Uyghur camps. They're connected to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, all that stuff. So, I think that it's hard, because as far as like picking like good guys and bad guys, I do think that it is what you talk about, the synarchy, trying to analyze, what the actual synarchy is, because they rebrand it so much. There's so many new names and different corporations to follow. And that's what I try to do, is track it all. Like you sent me the article, was Robert Engdahl, I think, that wrote the article about the BlackRock.
William Engdahl. William Engdahl is a really important source, and I've read his book Seeds of Destruction on the show So yeah, William Engdahl. People, if you don't know him, check him out, please. He's a really important writer.
So he talks about black stone and black rock, and I do think that those are really ones to study. But again, you have to remember the roots of them. They're Lehman Brothers. Like after Lehman Brothers goes bankrupt, they get rebranded as BlackRock, and it's Pete Peterson and Steven Schwartzman that start the Blackstone, and then they stake Larry Fink and BlackRock, who's of course now is the head of the Council on Foreign Relations in the old, David Rockefeller seat or whatever. So, yeah, those guys are all really important, but Lehman Brothers was also Kuhn and Loeb, so it goes back to the same Paul Warburg group that that we've talked about a lot too. So I don't know.
And Jacob Schiff.
Well, yeah, Jacob Schiff was Warburg's brother. I'm trying to think which one. Matt. He married Schiff's daughter. I mean, they're all, like I said, they call it the cousinhood or whatever, and they intermarry a lot, and it's amazing when you kind of go through and see like even like the BCCI, the guy that's like the Southern District of New York hero is Robert Morgenthau, right? He's the longtime district attorney in Southern District of New York. His great grandfather is a Lehman brother. I mean, his grandma was Fatty Lehman or whatever. So I mean, they're all like, even if you're the guy that's busting the BCCI bank or whatever, it's still a Lehman brother. I mean, I don't know. It's
all in the family.
All in the family. Yeah.
All right. Well, what a fun night it was. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it. You're sharing all of your very interesting thoughts with us. And I think, we just keep pulling back the layers, and people are going to see it. Eventually, they're going to see it. Anyway, I'm not going to stop. You're not going to stop. We're going to keep on going. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with us tonight. And I will see you tomorrow night with a brand new duo joining me. That will be Carol M. and Corky Goss to talk about their ideas for nuclear energy in the future. We'll see you then.